Hello, everyone. My name is Dara Lind. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. I'm co-host of the Vox podcast, The Weeds, and I've been covering immigration for long enough that I've noticed something really astounding happening over the last year and a half as the COVID pandemic has hit. And that's a lot of attention being paid to the idea of not just the essential worker, but in particular to immigrants as essential workers, because obviously so many of the sectors and professions that have been so essential to helping get America through the pandemic are sectors that are overrepresented by immigrants. And it's brought some attention, though perhaps not as much as that might imply, to the added vulnerabilities that immigrant workers face that, while at the same time we're lauding people as essential, they may not have the protections that we expect from both an immigrant rights and a labor rights perspective. And so to kind of flesh that out and talk about what that fight looks like on the ground, in the halls of Congress, in communities, we have three spectacular panelists here today. I'm joined by Maria Elena Inca, who is the executive director of the National Immigration Law Center and a former co-chair of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Immigration. Maria Elena is also a co-founder of the Immigrants Are Essential campaign with our second panelist, Saket Soni, who's a longtime immigrant rights advocate and activist and the founder and executive director of Resilience Force. And we're also being joined, as you can see, by Representative Joaquin Castro, who is the representative from Texas's 20th congressional district and one of the original co-sponsors of the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. Why don't we start with having the three of you talk a little bit about your own experiences and why it's so important for you as people, given your background, to fight for the kind of intersection of immigration and labor rights. Maria Elena, you want to go?
Oh, I was going to have Representative Castro lead us. Go for it, Representative.
Oh, sure. No. Well, I represent a city that was built by immigrants and built by hardworking people. And that includes folks from my own family. And my grandmother came to the United States from Coahuila, Mexico, a northern state in Mexico, around 1922 as an orphan when she was about 6 or 7 years old. And my grandmother, as an immigrant, never made it past elementary school. She never got even a high school degree. And so she worked her whole life as a maid and a babysitter and a cook, doing everything that she could to get by for herself and really to support her only child, which was my mom, Rosie. And so that was her existence, most of her childhood working, and then her whole adult life, never making much money, barely scraping by. And so these issues of immigration and the workforce, immigrants in the workforce, are incredibly important to me personally, but also I represent a bread and butter district in San Antonio, Texas, of people that are very hardworking people. And actually, I think very humble people in terms of what they ask for from the government. These aren't folks that ask a lot from their government, but both immigrant and non-immigrant, all they ask for is to live in a country of opportunity, a country where they can actually, not only get by for themselves, but hopefully thrive and do better for their kids. And so that's why I care about these issues so much. And that's why with Alex Padilla and Senator Warren and also Ted Lieu, we filed the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act in Congress this term, and why I think all of us are making this very strong push to finally get immigration reform done, particularly through reconciliation here in the next few months. And so I know that we're going to have a chance to talk about all those issues here today.
Great. Thank you, Representative Castro and Senator Padilla in absentia. So Dara, thank you so much for joining us and for the question today. Look, as an immigrant from Colombia, the fight for immigrant justice and worker justice is one and the same, right? My father was recruited to Rhode Island to work in the textile factories as a guest worker in the 1970s, when we as an immigrant family were able to come because the immigration laws were different, right? We came on as a result of the Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Immigration Act that allowed an expansion of who was welcome in the United States. The 1970s was a very different time in this country where my family, my father was a factory worker, textile worker. He was considered a skilled worker, right? He was considered essential to this nation, so much so that the country at the time said, And in order for you to thrive, your family should be able to come with you. So my father then was able to petition for my mother and my 9 brothers and sisters and me, and we came throughout the 1970s. And out of all of my brothers and sisters and I today, despite the fact that my father had a 2nd grade education, my mother had a 5th grade education, we lived and survived on minimum wage factory jobs and unemployment. I'm a child of all of the progressive policies from the 1960s and 70s that allowed for like job training programs for at-risk youth. That was, who I was considered when I was growing up. And today, the fact that I can fight for immigrant justice, that I can fight for our democracy and our Constitution is really the promise of America. And our fight at the National Immigration Law Center today is to ensure that, like my family and previous generations of immigrants and refugees to the United States, that we finally go back to having a nation where our immigration system actually allows us to thrive and to give our best to ourselves. And this is what today's fight and this political opportunity that we have in this moment, again, with Representative Castro and Senator Padilla's leadership on the Citizenship for Essential Workers for immigrants who are essential to finally be recognized under the law. And we'll have a chance to talk more about that.
Thanks, Maria Elena, and thanks, Representative Castro. My name is Saket Soni. I'm the Director of Resilience Force, and I'm an immigrant from India. I came to Chicago in the late 90s as a foreign student, and I became undocumented after I graduated. I spent a few years earning money through minimum wage jobs after 9/11 and saw firsthand how the culture, the political culture changed in a day for millions of immigrants. And then I went on a journey. In 2005, I arrived in New Orleans as a relief worker after Hurricane Katrina hit. If you remember, it was 16 years ago, almost to the day that Hurricane Ida just hit. As a relief worker, what I saw was the incredible process of rebuilding an American city, which was really a microcosm of this incredible process in front of us today of rebuilding America. And guess who was doing it? A lot of it was being done by immigrant workers. These are workers who came from across the country, across the world, really. And since then, I've seen how hurricane after hurricane, fire after fire, flood after flood, in this moment where our reality is shaped by the pandemic and climate change, right? These 2 crises that we're facing that'll shape our next decade, really, if not longer. In the middle of it, here are these immigrant workers who are helping us live, helping us rebuild, and helping us face the future. I'm on my way to New Orleans again, where Hurricane Ida hit, and millions are without power, but that's not all. There'll be schools, streets, all of this to rebuild while the pandemic is raging on. Louisiana has the worst numbers in the country. Right in the middle of it, the people who we're depending on are essential workers who are resilience workers who are immigrants. So I'm here for my members and for my constituency, but these are also the people who make all of us stronger, and we owe it to them. It was incredible, heartening when 18 months ago we were shouting our gratitude literally from balconies and rooftops for essential workers. And that's important. But as my members will tell you, gratitude is welcome, but it's not enough. We need healthcare. We need wages. We need unions. We need rights. And if you're an immigrant who's undocumented, you need one more thing. You need legal status. All that we're asking for is the recognition that is due, recognition for the Americans that these immigrants already are. And so that's the fight in front of us.
Saket, I'm really glad that we came to you last and that you've kind of opened the door to what I was already going to be asking you next, which is, as someone who's, been at, on the forefront of this at the work sites, in the kind of labor halls, what are the particular vulnerabilities that you see facing immigrant workers, particularly the resilience workers who are so often, kind of the front line between disaster and everyone else? And what are the protections and support that they need?
Well, the front lines used to be some imagined place that was distant, isolated. And today there are front lines in the South, front lines in the Midwest. All of California is one big front line for climate change. And half the states in the country are COVID front lines. But immigrant workers inside of that do have a unique experience. Firstly, there's just the fact that without legal protections and legal status, immigrant workers have a much harder time accessing even the legal protections that exist for them, right? A person stands on a Home Depot waiting for a contractor to pick him up, take him 2 hours away into Louisiana to fix a home, right? Or a hospital aide goes in to work a hospital where the COVID crisis is raging. And in the middle of those epicenters, these workers, documented or not, are due their legal rights. But they often don't access them. They often can't because it is so easy for employers, for subcontractors, to profit from simply, not paying the workers, not giving them protective gear, not giving them the bathroom breaks or the harnesses they need while they're fixing the roofs. Workers are also really afraid of retaliation. They fear that if they come forward to complain, they'll be fired or worse. We've seen contractors and employers call immigration on workers asking to be paid their fair wage that's due to them. Or when workers fall off roofs and get hurt, they're deposited not in front of hospitals, but in front of police stations. And underlying all of this is this, is this problem that basically legal status is a labor right. And without it, it's harder to access all of these other labor rights.
Thank you. Maria Elena, can you talk some about the work that NILCA's done protecting immigrant labor rights and what you've been learning from those fights?
Yeah, I think, Dara, just picking up on where Saket just left off about workers' rights or immigrant rights and immigrant rights or workers' rights. I think, for example, earlier this year in January in the Gainesville, Georgia explosion at a poultry plant that happened, right? We're talking about poultry workers that are feeding us, right? These are among those essential workers. There was an explosion there and 6 workers died. Part of the work that we've done over the last year has been, immediately bringing this to the attention of the Department of Labor. This was just before President Biden took office. And raising both the health and safety. This is very typical, right? What happens in every situation like this, as Saket just mentioned, you have undocumented workers who've been exploited. This is a company that actually had been under investigation for a long time. The poultry industry, for example, is majority people of color, many, many immigrants, many undocumented workers. And I remember the Department of Labor many years ago issued a report indicating that there was 100% wage violations among the workers there. And here you have an explosion that actually results in killing 6 workers, 6 essential workers. And we've been working with grassroots advocates and organizers in Georgia, groups like Sud Legal and others, to help support the families impacted by this and all of the workers that were injured, and working with the Department of Labor to issue the Department of Labor under the Biden administration just issued a $1 million fine against this company, and yet those workers who've been killed have been denied the ability to get legal status, and we must fight for all of them. And so, as Representative Castro mentioned earlier, we have a political once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right now through the reconciliation process to finally recognize these essential workers and immigrant youth, right? DACA recipients, so-called dreamers, people with temporary protected status, farm workers, right? All of the folks in our community who absolutely must be recognized under the law. They are the ones who have been helping us to recover. There is no recovery without immigrants. And I just want to say that again, there is absolutely no recovery without immigrants. And the fact is that a path to citizenship will both recognize the dignity and humanity of workers like those who died at the poultry plant, but also it provides a profound economic benefit to the nation, which is required to be part of the reconciliation package. So we are very hopeful. It is not done. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. We have a call to action at the end because we need every single one of us to work together with our champions in Congress, with Representative Castro, Senator Padilla, Dem leadership, and Biden and Harris to make sure that this is the year that we deliver relief for the very people that have allowed us to recover and continue fighting for us through the pandemic that we're still in the midst of and the climate crises, as Saket was just talking about with Hurricane Ida, for example.
I feel like y'all don't even need me. Like you're just queuing up, like for Representative Castro to talk. But Representative Castro, if I could ask you more about the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, both why you feel citizenship is kind of the fundamental thing that needs to happen for these people, who are so vulnerable on so many different fronts, and also how you see this as being different from previous pushes for immigrant legalization that would affect a lot of the same people.
Well, those are great questions. I think to answer the first part, to allow these folks to enjoy the fullness of American life. And Maria Elena and Saket both describe some of the very real obstacles that undocumented workers, laborers face when they don't have legal status. And for years in our country, there have been a handful of American industries, whether it's agriculture, construction, hospitality, for example, and others, that would not exist and would not succeed and profit the way they do, but for immigrant labor, much of it undocumented immigrant labor. And so one of the earliest issues that we took on when I was chairing the Congressional Hispanic Caucus last term, when the pandemic started, was the fact that meat processing plants, for example, for weeks, even though the pandemic was going on, these workers were not given the proper protections that they needed to protect themselves from getting what we were calling at the time the coronavirus. And a lot of folks are still vulnerable. And so the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act is a way to make sure that we can cut down on these abuses that we see by employers and by the workforce against folks because they're undocumented. And those abuses continue, and those dangers in terms of people not being fully protected from something like COVID-19, those things continue. And you add a layer on top of that, which is this intensifying targeting of immigrants. And we saw it over the previous 4 years, but now we're seeing it by governors like Greg Abbott and DeSantis in Florida and Ducey in Arizona and others who are blaming immigrants for bringing COVID-19 because they themselves as elected officials have been derelict in their duty in protecting their own residents from this pandemic. And so they're trying to transfer that blame. And of course, we know that that's an age-old tactic in American politics, particularly against immigrant groups, really of different nationalities over the years. And so that's why this piece of legislation is incredibly important. And we're hoping that it can be included in the reconciliation process. We've had different attempts before. I think we came close in 2013, 2014, when the US Senate passed with about 68 votes an immigration reform bill, but John Boehner was unwilling to put it on the floor for a vote because of the Hastert rule. We can't miss this moment. This is my 19th year in public service. I turned 47 on September 16th, and I got elected when I was 28 years old. And I've been around long enough to know now that when you miss a moment in politics, not just in politics, in policymaking, when you miss a moment in policymaking, it can be a while before that moment comes around again. And so the next few months are going to be absolutely critical to finally getting something important done for these people whose lives have been in limbo, whose lives have often been abused and taken for granted for too long in our country. We've swept it under the rug and swept them under the rug as well. And so we got to get it done now.
I wanted to open it up to the three of you to talk some about the Immigrants Are Essential campaign. As you can see from Maria Elena's shirt, it's hashtag Immigrants Are Essential, and how this fits into this opportunity that Representative Castro has just laid out that we have, and what you're hoping to see coming out of the campaign. Maria Elena, go.
Okay.
You've got the shirt, you get the question first.
Okay, sounds great. So, actually over a year ago, in May of last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we saw that there was this opening, as Saket already shared, when we were, we would get on conference calls, and I remember 7 p.m., anyone in New York, you would hear the applause, right? Like just this, still get chills thinking of like how many people across the entire globe started coming out on their balconies and recognizing, right? People, average everyday people were recognizing the work that essential workers in the healthcare industry, educators, our farm workers, restaurant workers, grocery workers, right? All of the people who've been delivering so that we can work from home, et cetera. So Saket and I came together really to talk about this opening that we had at that time, and also that this was an opening that will close very quickly, right? I think that political moment that Representative Castro was just talking about, that policy opening, is also a cultural opening where we believe that the majority of people are absolutely in support of these individuals, and the law has just not caught up yet, right? Congress has not caught up yet, right? So we thought that this was a moment to really use art and culture and have artists come together to amplify the stories of those essential workers, many of whom are immigrants. About almost 70% of immigrants work in one of the essential industries. And we believe that by creating that narrative and culture change, it would create the political opening for Congress to finally recognize the dignity and humanity of immigrants in our nation. And, it's hashtag Immigrants Are Essential, because this is not about honoring only workers. It's about immigrants and our dignity, our humanity as individuals in this country, and this moment that exists to recognize them as part of the Citizenship or Essential Workers Act. So let me pause there, and Saket, see if you want to add anything specifically, more about the work that we've done. And actually, you should maybe mention the op-ed we did too.
Well, just to build on what Maria Elena said and Representative Castro's point about a moment and the moment we're in, so much great change has happened in America because of disasters and in the aftermath of extraordinary crisis. Much of the safety net we have today was a result of the Great Depression, a tragedy, right? Disasters are not opportunities. They're terrible things. They're tragic, but we progressives have to get better at taking openings where they exist. If you think about so much immigration policy in this country, it's the result of another disaster that provided an opening for those who wanted to take it. 9/11, a terrible tragedy, but also the beginning of so much pain for immigrants who, as Representative Castro said, as usual, were blamed for it, right? The idea that we will go back to normal after this pandemic, there's not going to be a normal, right? We're seeing the government spend money like never before, create rules and safety net protections like never before. We're in a moment where we're going to see the impacts of the pandemic, and so legalizing millions of immigrants as part of that, is actually not as unbelievable as it would have been before the pandemic. So we tested whether the political will was there, whether the cultural moment allowed for it. The tests came back very well. All of the people across the country who were shouting from rooftops for essential workers started to make the connection that, among those essential workers are immigrants, and among the things they need is legal status. We did it in the language of art, which is so compelling. I invite you all to go to immigrantsAreessential.org and see what these extraordinary artists have done. That we commissioned in partnership with our partners at SOSI. And we put together an argument in an early op-ed right at the beginning of the pandemic. I think what Representative Castro and his other colleagues' leadership shows is that what we have on top of everything else is this set of champions, in Congress who are fighting the fight for us, and Immigrants Are Essential was a way to rally the ground troops to make sure that the representative and others are not alone when they go in to fight for us.
Yeah, and Dara, if I could just share really briefly, just to give an example of that, the beautiful artwork, and many of the artists that we commissioned, again, with the help of the SOSI agency, many of them were immigrants themselves. And one of them is the amazing Colombian artist, Paola Mendoza, who did a portrait of workers who had died because of COVID, right? Who had been infected by COVID. And it was a beautiful way to honor them, their life, their work, and their families, right? To create the space for grieving and mourning, but also celebrating who these individuals were. And I'm particularly thinking of Mario Hernandez Enrique, who brought his wife and 3 daughters to the United States to give his girls an education and an opportunity. And I have to say, when I saw the beautiful portrait, and heard his story and his family. There's a recording connected to each of the paintings. I was reminded of my father, Arturo, right? Who, like my father, sacrificed so much, and my mother sacrificed. They left everything behind, our families, our language, just the beauty of our country, just like Mario did, so that his girls could have a better opportunity and a better life. And he got COVID. He was an essential worker. He worked both in a laundromat and in a grocery store, and he had no option. Working was not an option for him. And he wore masks, he wore gloves, and it wasn't sufficient. He ended up dying. And so we now have this political opportunity of our lifetime to make sure that the Marios of the world who did not get a chance to have that path to citizenship, that we do so now. And this is a reminder, right, that elections matter, right? Last November and in January this year in Georgia, immigrants, new Americans, Black voters, Native American voters, right? Multiracial, multi-generational coalition of voters delivered a victory to Democrats, Senate, House, and the White House. This is the moment for our policymakers to lead as well and ensure that we do not let this moment go away. Like, we must deliver relief for immigrants who are essential, both as workers, but also those who have been in our country for a long time with temporary protected status and dreamers, et cetera. So it's the beauty of the art to be able to tell those stories in a way that reaches people that would not otherwise be able to do that, and then to turn that into political action, as we're trying to do with our champions in Congress.
I don't want to short us on time for Q&A, but Representative Castro, we've just kind of heard a lot from Saket and Maria Elena about this kind of interplay between, culture and public opinion and how that affects politics. How do you see that as an elected official and political leader, and the role of culture in kind of bearing this forward?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think everything that advocates have been marshaling, particularly over the last few years, and during this pandemic, to point out the importance of immigrants and the importance of immigrant workers, that's not lost on the members of Congress or elected officials throughout the country. And that's what helps create a moment in politics and in policymaking where you can actually get something like this, which would be historic, to actually get it done. Because everything, the way I see it, everything that I do, I mean, whether it's speeches or panels or all of the advocacy, ultimately, that's got to lead to a bill being passed through the Congress and signed by the president that is going to help change these people's lives for the better. But the stage that is set for that, by reminding us of their humanity and pointing out their critical role in society, all of that makes a big difference.
So we're going to be opening this up for Q&A in a few minutes. If you're watching this and you have a question to submit, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions to our facilitators, who will then run them to me. But before that, I think we actually have figured out how to get the remarks from Senator Padilla. And so we're happy to introduce those to you, and then we'll have some questions for the panelists after.
Hi, I'm Senator Alex Padilla, and I have the honor of representing California in the United States Senate. Thank you for inviting me to open this Labor Day discussion on the essential work of immigrants. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 5 million immigrant workers without permanent legal status have served in essential roles. Immigrant workers work as nurses and farm workers. They work on construction crews and sanitation teams. They put their own lives and safety at risk in order to keep critical services running and care for our loved ones. And immigrants continue to disproportionately serve in essential roles as we begin the process of recovery. The United States government deems these immigrants essential to keeping our country running and keeping Americans alive. Yet that same government denies them permanent protections. Dreamers, farm workers, TPS holders, and many more have waited years for Congress to act on providing a well-earned path to citizenship. It is past time for us to act. That's why the first bill I introduced as a United States Senator was the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. It would create a pathway to citizenship for the essential workers without permanent legal status who have kept Americans healthy, fed, and safe throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. As the proud son of 2 immigrant workers myself, this fight is personal to me. I know firsthand the value that immigrants bring to our country. Like so many others, my mom and dad came here to make a better life. They arrived in California from different parts of Mexico in the 1960s. They each came with the belief in the promise of the American dream, that no matter where you're from, if you work hard, you can contribute to your community and build a better future for your family. My parents worked tirelessly for 40 years to realize that dream. My dad as a short order cook, and my mom as a housekeeper. After nearly 30 years, they became American citizens. Now, I'm here today because of my parents' many years of hard work and the values that they instilled in me. But I'm also here because of my parents' good fortune. Too many immigrants across the country today with the same values and drive to succeed as my mom and dad are left to struggle against the arbitrary and unfair rules of our immigration system. We need a pathway to citizenship to bring stability and security to immigrant families working hard in pursuit of their American dream. As we celebrate and recognize the contributions of America's workers today, we must make sure to include the labor and sacrifices of our immigrant workforce. As the pandemic made clear, our nation depends on the work of immigrants. We need to reform our immigration system to promote justice, protect dignity, and better reflect the needs of our country. I want to thank the National Immigrant Law Center for their advocacy for immigrant rights, and I look forward to hearing from today's panelists. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Senator Padilla and his staff, and to our facilitators for making those remarks happen. We're gonna give just a couple more seconds for Q&A while we figure something out for the panelists. So if you do have any questions, you should type them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen now. I will go ahead and take prerogative while we're getting those fed in. What are all of you hoping to see from the Biden-Harris administration in terms of supporting legislation that's on the floor, but in terms of executive action that we haven't seen yet to protect immigrant workers?
I mean, I'll kick this off, Dara. So one is, again, just focusing on the fact that there is a bill in Congress, both that Representative Castro, soon to be Senator, and Senator Padilla have been championing the citizenship for essential workers, but really this issue of a path to citizenship, right? When I was co-chairing the Biden-Sanders task force with Representative Roybal Allard, one of the things that we got a commitment for was a fast track to citizenship for essential workers. And so this, and President Biden from day one said that he called on Congress to deliver on a path to citizenship for the 11 million. And there are these different bills that are going through the reconciliation process. So again, this is the moment for the Biden-Harris administration to use all of their political power. Like this, the elections matter and they must deliver for immigrant communities through the reconciliation package. Like this is the only opportunity we have to actually get a path to citizenship for millions of our family members and community members. On the executive action, there's also a tremendous opportunity with Secretary Mayorkas heading up the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Walsh at the Department of Labor, especially because the Biden-Harris administration has very, very clearly prioritized racial and economic justice and equity as part of the priorities for the administration. And so we have an opportunity to transform the way that federal government enforces laws away from ICE detaining and deporting people, and instead having robust labor and employment enforcement and making sure that workers like those workers in Georgia who are collaborating with the federal government with the OSHA investigation and other federal labor and employment violations, that workers who come forward in the midst of labor disputes can get deferred action and get that protection from deportation. That is essential. And not unless there is an opportunity for the Department of Labor and Department of Homeland Security, my understanding from conversations with both Secretary Walsh and Secretary Mayorkas is this absolutely is part of their plan. And so we're looking forward to partnering with them to make that a reality so that all workers can come forward safely and report labor and employment violations, whether it is retaliation because of union organizing, because of wage theft, sexual harassment. There's so many labor violations, and we depend on workers to enforce those laws at the state and local level and at the federal level. And so they must get that protection from the federal government as well.
And I would just add that we need the president to get as involved on the issue of immigration as he was on the infrastructure issue, where he absolutely corrals everybody and gets support around doing this through reconciliation and getting it done. Now, the extra complication here is that you also need the Senate parliamentarian on the Senate side to give the okay. And there is historical precedent for handling immigration issues through the reconciliation process. So, I certainly hope that that will be the case in 2021. But for the president to really get in there and own this issue the way he did infrastructure and to make it happen. Some of the other issues, I agree with Maria Elena, that there are a lot of companies in this country who have gotten rich off of systematically abusing immigrant undocumented laborers and stealing their wages from them. And so that kind of enforcement to make sure that people are getting paid what they should is absolutely critical and important. And we should expand that function. I thought that we should have broken up ICE. I told Secretary Mayorkas before he was secretary that we should take the enforcement function away from ICE and let another department do it that doesn't have the same challenges with credibility, with criminality, and the same baggage. And no, that's not, I'm not offering my opinion, that's fact. If you look at the record of ICE, that there is a better department to do that kind of action. And then finally on Title 42, to lift the Title 42 restrictions from folks. Survey after survey has shown that the rate of vaccination among refugees or asylum seekers in this case, which is mostly what we're talking about at the southern border, is higher than it is for the general population in Texas, for example. And so there are ways to improve upon that even more as you are admitting folks to allow them to wait for their asylum cases to be heard. So those are some of the challenges that I hope that the administration will take up.
One of President Biden's paramount concerns in the coming 6 to 8 weeks, and probably for the rest of the year, is going to be the rebuilding of Louisiana after Hurricane Ida, right? And justifiably so. That has to be an American priority. Well, the truth is that's not going to happen without immigrants, right? I've been on the phone the last 24 hours with crews of immigrant workers coming from across the country, reporting for work, right, to rebuild Louisiana, right? Many from your district, Representative Castro, but even from further away. These are people who, many of whom are undocumented, many of whom have worked a dozen hurricanes, and if given a chance, they could build a city overnight. They could rebuild a mid-sized American city in 6 weeks if they're allowed to. But look at what happened last year. Hurricane Laura hit Lake Charles, Louisiana. Half the homes there are still in disrepair. Most of the tax base has moved away, and that city is never coming back. And why? Not because the money wasn't there, but because we made the conditions too harsh for the workers, and they had no ability to stay. They had to leave. These are workers who are fine sleeping in their cars and on the street, but they do need the basic humanity and decency afforded to them by America as they rebuild America. So I would say, as we rebuild America after the pandemic and after hurricanes, floods, and fires, I would say it's quite easy for the Biden administration to give immediate status to those rebuilders. And we should all we should all corral around that demand for the rest of the year.
I'd like to kind of take that and broaden it out a little and ask all of you what you feel that, everyone who's watching this and kind of everyone in your communities can do to better support immigrants and immigrant workers as we move forward through the rest of the year. Saket, since you're on, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, sure. I think that the thing is that we really want to imagine that COVID is coming to an end and we're getting through it. That's human nature. We've been through it for 18 months, and in order to live with it, we're learning to work it into the normal and get used to it. But I would say, we need to make sure we don't find it normal. It's not normal that our children are still at risk and our elders are at risk, just like it's not normal that there are hurricanes every week in America and half of California is burning. And inside of that, we need to make a call to action that immigrant workers should get all of the protections and be recognized as the Americans they already are. That's really the call that needs to come from every part of society, from teachers who are concerned about the safety of their kids that they teach, from doctors and nurses who see the hospitals overflowing and say, it doesn't have to be that way. For all of us who from different walks of life are saying justice is needed, part of our definition of justice really has to be the full inclusion of immigrants as Americans to solve the problem in front of us.
And I would just offer a call to action. As somebody obviously in elective office, the next few months will be critical, and the federal Congress and of course the president ultimately will have to, through reconciliation, make this happen. So I would ask people to reach out to their federal representatives, and to, even if they're not your federal representatives, reach out to their office, but also beyond that, actually, to reach out to other elected officials in different levels of government. Because it's primarily about the federal Congress, but elected officials at every level of government, from the state legislators to the city council members to school board members. Because remember, immigrant children our even undocumented immigrant children are also students in schools. Every elected officials at every level of government have to know that this is a priority and that we want to see change here. And elected officials talk to each other at different levels. And so you want those members of Congress to be hearing it from their city council members, that this is an important thing and that they're hearing from constituents. And so, we have, I say a large we, right? Everybody, we have come a long way in what I would consider is this last iteration of a push since about 2006, when you had a lot of thousands and thousands of young people mostly and their allies on the American streets pushing for DACA and immigration reform back then. It has been a long fight to get this far and to get to this point. And these next few months will be absolutely important in finally achieving it.
Yeah, and I'll just close, Dara, to echo what both Representative Castro and Socket have said. There's so much in this moment that we could be doing on so many fronts, but this is the moment. This is the political moment. There's nothing else more important than every single one of us and our families, our neighbors, our loved ones, making those phone calls to all of the elected officials, right? To our mayors, to our governors, state officials, the delegations, and to members of Congress and to the administration, which is to take action, to make sure that they do not leave our families behind, that this is the year to get it done. Next year we have midterm elections, right? Then we'll get into, once again, it's not politically feasible. Like, this is the year to make sure that millions of our family members, community members finally are recognized under the law and are placed on a path to citizenship. And so I invite everybody who is watching to go to our website, nilc.org, and take action. And that you can immediately send a message to your members of Congress. You can share that information with others, and I'll put it in the chat as well so everybody has access to that. But this is absolutely the time. We really do not have time to waste. This is the moment to make sure that every single day you wake up and say, what else can I do to make sure that Congress hears the message, that the administration hears the message, as Representative Castro said, for them to do everything possible, as they've done with infrastructure, to ensure that a path to citizenship is finally available to our community members.
With that, unfortunately, we don't have time to get to all of your questions. I'm very sorry about that, but thank you so much to our panelists for making the time. As Maria Elena said, if you are inspired by this and want to continue participating in the campaign and in the movement to kind of capitalize on this moment, you can go to nilc.org, which has information about the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act and ways to continue to support that, and the hashtag Immigrants Are Essential campaign from NILC and Resilience Force. Thanks all to all of you, and I hope that you have a wonderful and relaxing Labor Day.
Thank you all. Thank you, Representative Castro, for your leadership. Thanks, Dara.
Thank you.
Yeah.